Lily Ashford stood inside the cookhouse of Silver Ridge Ranch, her fingers gripping the edge of the window frame so hard her knuckles turned white. Through the dusty glass, she watched the scene unfolding in the yard. Two men faced each other in the fading light. One was Caleb Hawk, the mountain man who had hired her 6 weeks ago to cook for his dying ranch. The other was Silas Blackwood, the man she had spent 2 years running from, the man she was supposed to marry. On the table between them sat $20,000 in crisp bills. Enough money to save Silver Ridge. Enough to pay every debt, rebuild the barn, hire a full crew for 5 years. All Caleb had to do was hand her over. Lily pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. She could see the tension in Caleb's shoulders, the way his jaw worked beneath his beard. She could see Blackwood's 6 armed men positioned behind him like wolves waiting for a signal. And she could feel the familiar weight of dread settling into her bones, the same dread that had followed her across 2,000 miles of American wilderness. She had known this moment would come. She had always known. You cannot outrun a man who owns judges and police and half the politicians in Illinois. You can only delay the reckoning. And every night for 2 years, as she lay in whatever bed she had found in whatever town she was passing through, she had imagined this exact scene. The moment when running stopped working and she would have to stand still and face what was behind her. The question burning through her mind was simple. Would Caleb take the money? Would he look at that fortune and see what any rational man would see, a way out, a way to save everything his father had built? All it would cost him was one woman he had known for 6 weeks. Lily closed her eyes. 6 weeks. That was all it had been. 6 weeks as she stepped off a supply wagon and walked into the worst kitchen she had ever seen. 6 weeks since she looked into the hard, cold eyes of a mountain man and decided this was the place where she would stop running. 6 weeks since everything changed. This is how it began. The advertisement had been buried in the back pages of a territorial newspaper between notices for land claims and livestock auctions. It read simply, "Cook wanted, Silver Ridge Ranch, Montana Territory. Remote location, room and board provided, wages negotiable. Inquire at Dawson's General Store, Elk Crossing." Lily had been in a boarding house in Helena at the time, using the last of the money her lawyer had given her, sleeping with a chair wedged beneath the door handle every night. She had been moving for 22 months. Helena was her 7th stop. Before that, Denver. Before Denver, Kansas City. Before Kansas City, St. Louis. Always moving west, always putting distance between herself and Chicago, always looking over her shoulder for men in suits who asked too many questions. She had learned to read the signs. A stranger lingering too long outside her window. A telegram operator who seemed too interested in her name. A man in a saloon who watched her with recognition instead of curiosity. Each time she packed her single leather suitcase and disappeared before dawn. But Helena was different. In Helena, the money was running out. In Helena, her hands had started shaking at odd moments, and she found herself standing in the middle of rooms, forgetting why she had entered them. 2 years of running had worn her down to something thin and brittle, like a wire stretched too tight. She needed to disappear completely. Not into another town where Blackwood's reach could find her, but into the wilderness itself, into the kind of place where mail came once a month and strangers were noticed immediately, a place where a woman could vanish from the world. She thought about what her mother used to say before the consumption took her when Lily was 16. "Lillian, the Lord does not give us burdens we cannot carry. He gives us burdens that teach us how strong we already are." Her mother had been wrong about a lot of things, maybe, but she had been right about strength. Lily had more of it than she had ever imagined. 2 years of running had not broken her. It had sharpened her into something harder and more deliberate than the girl who once stood in a white dress in her father's parlor, waiting to be given away like a parcel. She was done being given away. She was done being hunted. She needed a place to stand and breathe and think clearly for the first time in months. A remote ranch in the Montana mountains was exactly that kind of place. The supply wagon that carried her to Silver Ridge took 2 days to cover 40 miles of rough mountain road. The driver, an old man named Gus, who smelled of tobacco and spoke in single syllables, told her she was either brave or crazy. Lily said nothing. She watched the landscape change from open prairie to pine forests to rugged mountain terrain, and with every mile she felt the weight on her chest lighten just slightly. The farther she went from civilization, the farther she went from Silas Blackwood. When the wagon finally crested the last ridge and Silver Ridge Ranch spread out below them in a wide mountain valley, Lily's first thought was that the place was dying. The barn leaned at an angle that defied physics. The fences were patched with wire and prayer. The main house had a roof that sagged in the middle like a tired horse. The corrals were empty except for a few bony cattle and two horses that looked like they had given up on life about the same time their owner had. But the land was something else entirely. Mountains rose on three sides covered in pine and spruce that turned the air sharp and clean. A creek ran through the valley floor catching sunlight like broken glass. The grass was brown from winter, but showed the first pale green hints of spring pushing through. It was beautiful in the way that only wild places can be beautiful, with a grandeur that made human problems seem small and temporary. Lily understood in that moment why a man would fight to keep a place like this, even a dying version of it. And standing in the yard shoeing a horse that clearly did not need shoeing was a man who looked like the mountain itself had carved him from rock and stubbornness. Caleb Hawk did not look up when she climbed down from the wagon. He kept his back to her, hammering at the horse's hoof with the kind of focused intensity that told Lily he was avoiding something. Avoiding her specifically. Avoiding the reality that he had broken down and sent for help. Mr. Hawk, he still did not look up. Bunkhouse is that way. Cookhouse is the log building with the chimney. Do not expect much. I was not planning to. Something in her voice made him glance over his shoulder. Later, Lily would learn that Caleb noticed everything, even when he pretended not to. In that first glance, she saw him register surprise. She was not what he had expected. Most women who took cooking jobs on failing ranches were either desperate widows or girls running from bad situations. Lily supposed she was the second kind, but she did not look it. She stood in her simple gray traveling dress with her worn leather suitcase, watching him with steady eyes that refused to apologize for anything. I need to know if you can actually cook, Caleb said, dropping the horse's hoof and straightening to his full height. He was tall, taller than she had anticipated. His beard was dark and unkempt, his eyes the color of winter sky, and his expression suggested he had not smiled in a very long time. Last person who answered my advertisement could not boil water without ruining it. I can cook. That is what she said too. Lily set down her suitcase. She looked at this hard, suspicious man and made a calculation. Deference would not work here. Caleb Hawk did not want someone polite. He wanted someone real. Mr. Hawk, I rode 2 days in a wagon that smelled like rotting potatoes to get here. I am tired. I am hungry. And I am fairly certain you are just as desperate as I am, or you would not have hired someone sight unseen. So why do we not skip the part where you test my patience, and I will skip the part where I turn around and leave? Show me the kitchen. Caleb blinked. Nobody talked to him like that. She could see it in the way his body stiffened, the way his mouth opened and then closed again. He was a man accustomed to silence and obedience, not challenge. Kitchen is a strong word for what you are about to see, he said finally. I have seen worse. She had not. The cookhouse was a disaster that would have made any professional chef weep. Dried food crusted on every surface. The cast iron stove looked like it had not been properly cleaned in months, maybe longer. A family of mice had claimed the flour barrel as sovereign territory. The place smelled like old grease and surrender and the slow, sad death of a man's pride. Lily walked through it slowly, keeping her face absolutely neutral. She had learned that skill in Chicago, standing in Blackwood's hotel kitchen while terrible things happened in rooms she was not supposed to know about. The skill of seeing everything and showing nothing. The last cook was actually one of the ranch hands who drew the short straw, Caleb said from the doorway. There was something in his voice that might have been shame. We have been through 4 of them in 6 months. I can see why. She set down her suitcase, rolled up her sleeves, and looked at the mess before her the way a general surveys a battlefield. This was something she could fix. This was something she could control. After 2 years of controlling nothing, of running and hiding and sleeping with one eye open, the simple act of cleaning a kitchen felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Do you have any cleaning supplies that are not covered in dust? Probably not. Then I will need to make a list. I also need to know how many men I am cooking for. Caleb's jaw tightened. Just me. The admission hung in the air between them. Just him. This entire ranch, this legacy his father had spent 30 years building, reduced to one stubborn man, eating alone in a cookhouse built for 20. But I am hoping to have a crew of 8 before the spring drive, he added. Lily turned to look at him directly. You are hoping to have a crew, or you are planning to have a crew. What is the difference? Hope is what you do when you have given up. Planning is what you do when you still believe you can win. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Something cracked just barely in the stone wall he had built around himself. It might have been anger. It might have been the first flicker of something he had not felt in years. He could not tell the difference anymore. I will have a crew, he said quietly, one way or another. Good. Lily opened a cabinet and a cascade of stale hardtack tumbled out onto the floor. Because I did not come all this way to cook for one stubborn mountain man. I came to feed cowboys. That night, Caleb Hawk ate the first real meal he had consumed in months. He sat alone at the long table in the cookhouse, the table that used to seat 20 men and now echoed with nothing but the sound of his own breathing, and tried to understand how this woman had turned rancid supplies in a filthy kitchen into beef stew that tasted like something worth living for. The stew was simple. Beef potatoes, onions, herbs she had somehow found growing wild behind the cookhouse. Nothing fancy, nothing that should have mattered. But the first spoonful hit Caleb's tongue and something inside him came undone. It was not just the flavor, it was what the flavor represented. Someone had taken the time to make something good for him. Someone had looked at what little he had and turned it into something nourishing. For a man who had been eating hardtack and jerky and his own bitterness for the better part of a year, it was almost too much. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, and tried not to think about what it meant that a stranger's cooking could make him feel less alone than he had felt in years. She worked quietly in the kitchen area, cleaning as she went, her movements efficient and practiced in a way that spoke of years of experience in kitchens far more demanding than this one. She never asked him if the food was good. She already knew. You did not learn to cook like this on a ranch, Caleb said when his bowl was empty. No. Where then does it matter? I like to know who I am employing. Lily kept her back to him. You are employing a cook, Mr. Hawk. That is all you need to know. Caleb set down his spoon. The sound was loud in the empty room. I had 3 men walk out last week because I could not feed them properly. Before that, I lost 2 to a ranch up north that paid less but treated them better. My father built this place from nothing, and I am watching it die because I cannot figure out how to make people want to stay. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough, with something that sounded like the truth being dragged out against its will. So yes, it matters, because if you are going to disappear like everyone else, I would rather know now. Lily was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the Montana wind pressed against the walls of the cookhouse like something alive. I worked in a hotel kitchen in Boston, she said carefully, choosing each word like a woman walking through a minefield. The kitchen served 300 people a night. I learned to cook under pressure. It was a lie wrapped around a truth. She had worked in a hotel kitchen, yes, but not in Boston. In Chicago, in Blackwood's Hotel. The hotel that served as a front for things she still could not bring herself to name out loud. Why did you leave? Same reason you are still here. Sometimes staying is harder than leaving, and sometimes leaving is the only way to survive. She turned back to her work before he could ask what she meant, and Caleb finished his meal in silence. But his mind would not stop turning over her words. There was a story there, a big one, something dark and heavy hiding behind those steady brown eyes. Every instinct his father had drilled into him screamed not to trust a woman with secrets. His father's voice, grave and final, echoed in his memory the way it always did. Trust the land, Caleb. Never trust people. People will always find a way to disappoint you. But his father's ranch was dying. And this woman with her secrets had just cooked the first meal in months that did not taste like giving up. The next morning, Lily was already at work before dawn. Caleb found her in the neglected garden plot behind the cookhouse on her knees in the cold dirt, measuring out rows with a piece of string. Her breath came in white clouds in the early mountain air, but she did not seem to notice the cold. What are you doing? Planting a vegetable garden. You are paying me to cook. I can cook better with fresh ingredients. It is March. Nothing is going to grow for weeks, which is why I am planning now instead of hoping later. She glanced up at him with the slightest curve at the corner of her mouth. Learned that from someone recently. Despite himself, Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he did not recognize. He looked away. You need supplies. Talk to me first. We are not exactly flush with cash. I noticed. Your supply accounts are a mess. How would you know that? Because I was looking for basic cooking staples and found receipts showing you are paying twice what you should for half of what you need. Whoever has been handling your accounts is either incompetent or stealing from you. Caleb's jaw tightened like a man who had just been punched. That would be me handling the accounts. Oh. Lily had the grace to look embarrassed, but only for a moment. Then you are just incompetent, not a thief. That is actually better. Incompetence can be fixed. I do not need fixing. Mr. Hawk, you hired me to fix your food problem. I am telling you the food problem is connected to your money problem. You cannot afford good supplies because your suppliers are cheating you. Let me handle the accounts. You are a cook, not a business manager. In Boston, I managed kitchen supply orders for a 300-seat restaurant. I negotiated with vendors who had been in business longer than we have been alive. I know how to spot a bad deal. She stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt, and looked him in the eye without flinching. But if you would rather be overpaying for rotten potatoes, that is your choice. Caleb wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her to stay in her kitchen and mind her own business. But the truth was that his pride had already cost him his crew, and it was about to cost him his ranch. Sometimes a man had to swallow what was hard to swallow. Fine, he said roughly. You can look at the accounts, but do not change anything without asking me first. Of course not. It is your ranch. She said it without sarcasm, but somehow it still felt like she was telling him something he had not yet figured out for himself. 3 days later, Caleb rode into town with a list Lily had written in neat, precise handwriting. She had reorganized his entire supply system, identified which vendors were overcharging him, and found alternatives that would save nearly 30% on basic goods. How did you do this? He had asked her that morning, staring at the numbers in genuine disbelief. I paid attention, Lily Ripple had replied. Most people do not. Standing in the general store with her list in his hand, Caleb felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something larger and more dangerous than gratitude. It was the feeling of not being alone anymore. Caleb Hawk, the voice came from behind him. He turned to find Holt Brennan, a weathered cowboy he had worked with years ago before Holt moved on to a bigger spread up north. Holt was the kind of man who looked like saddle leather had feelings and decided to walk upright. 50 years of sun and wind had carved his face into a permanent squint. Heard you are hiring again, Holt said. Might be. Why by no me? Because word is getting around that something changed at Silver Ridge. Pete Garner was in town last week, said he stopped by your place for water, and your new cook gave him the best meal he has had in months. Said the whole place felt different. Caleb's chest tightened. Pete Garner was a drifter, a man Caleb barely knew. Yet Lily had fed him anyway without being asked, without hesitation. She is good at what she does, Caleb admitted. Good enough to bring in a full crew before the spring drive. That is the plan. Holt grinned beneath his mustache. Then count me in. Have not had decent food in 2 years. My last outfit fed us beans and regret morning, noon, and night. When do you start? I already started. My horse is tied out front. By the end of the week, Caleb had hired 4 men. Not because of better pay, not because of easier work, but because word had spread through the territory that Silver Ridge Ranch had a cook who could actually cook in a kitchen that felt like coming home after a long time in the cold. Lily never took credit for any of it. She just kept working. But Caleb noticed everything, even when he pretended not to. He noticed how she learned each cowboy's name within a day, how she asked about their families, their old injuries, their stories, how she kept coffee hot all night for the men on watch rotation, how she started teaching Wes Callahan, the 15-year-old orphan who worked the stables, to read using old newspapers, and a patience that seemed bottomless. Wes was the one who got to Lily the most, though she would never have admitted it. The boy had been alone since he was 12. His parents had died of fever on the trail west, and he had survived by attaching himself to ranches the way a stray dog attaches itself to whoever feeds it. He was skinny and eager and desperate to prove himself useful, and when Lily sat with him after supper each night, pointing at words in the newspaper and sounding them out slowly, something in the boy's face would change. The hard, wary look that orphans carry would soften into something that looked almost like trust. It reminded Lily of the people she had seen in Blackwood's warehouse, the young ones, the ones whose eyes had not yet gone completely dead. She could not save those people then. She had failed them with her silence. But she could help this boy, and every letter Wes learned to read felt like a small act of redemption. The entire atmosphere of the ranch shifted from silent endurance to something that felt almost like a family. And he noticed how she never talked about herself, never mentioned Boston except in vague passing, never explained why a woman with her skills and her intelligence was working on a failing ranch in the remote mountains of Montana Territory. There was a wall around Lily Ashford. Caleb could see it clearly because he had built the same kind of wall around himself. The difference was that his wall was made of stubbornness and grief. Hers was made of fear. One evening, 2 weeks after her arrival, Caleb found Lily in the cookhouse, after supper, going over the supply accounts by lamplight. The golden glow softened her features, and for a moment Caleb stood in the doorway just watching her. "You do not have to do this," he said. "I am almost finished." "That is not what I meant." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "You have been here 2 weeks and you have changed everything. The crew is coming back together. The ranch feels alive again. I just cannot figure out why you care so much about a place that is not yours." She set down her pencil and met his eyes. In the lamplight, her gaze was steady and deep, and Caleb felt something open inside him that had been sealed shut since his father's funeral. "You asked me once why I left Boston," she said. "I left because I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up, and people got hurt because of my silence. I will not make that mistake again." "What does that have to do with cooking for cowboys?" "Nothing, everything." Her voice was soft but carried the weight of something that had been turned over and over in a restless mind. "Sometimes you cannot fix the past, but you can choose what kind of person you are going to be in the present. I chose to be someone who shows up and does the work, no matter how small it seems." Caleb felt something crack open inside him, something ancient and carefully guarded. "My father used to say, 'Trust the land and never trust people,'" he said quietly. "He got betrayed too many times. Partners who stole from him, workers who left when times got hard, friends who vanished when he needed help. By the time he died, he did not trust anyone except me. And you believed him." "I had no reason not to. Everyone did leave. Everyone did disappoint me." He stopped himself. "Until what?" Lily asked softly. "Until you showed up and proved him wrong." Lily looked away, but not before he saw something flicker across her face. Fear and longing and regret all tangled together like a knot that could not be undone. "Mr. Hawk, you should be careful about putting too much faith in me." "Why?" "Because I am not staying forever. Nobody does." "You could." The words escaped before Caleb could catch them. They hung in the air between them like smoke, impossible to take back. Lily's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Something raw and unguarded flashed across her face before she could hide it. "I mean," Caleb fumbled for recovery, hearing the roughness in his own voice. "The ranch is growing again. I will need permanent staff. You are good at this. You could stay on if you wanted." Lily stood up abruptly, gathering her papers with hands that trembled just slightly. "I should finish these accounts. Good night, Mr. Hawk." She was gone before he could say another word. Caleb sat alone in the empty cookhouse, cursing himself for speaking too much and too soon. But the truth was out now, and no amount of silence could push it back. He did not just need Lily to keep the ranch running. He needed her here for reasons that had nothing to do with cooking. The next morning, Lily was back to business as usual. The crew noticed the tension between them. They noticed everything. "Boss is moon-eyed over the cook," Caleb heard one of the cowboys mutter. "Can you blame him? She is the only person alive who can out-stubborn Caleb Hawk." 2 weeks later, on a morning that started like every other, a rider came to the ranch carrying a telegram. Caleb was repairing fence line in the high pasture when Holt came riding up at a gallop, his weathered face tight with worry. "Boss, you need to see this." The telegram was addressed to Lily Ashford, care of Silver Ridge Ranch, Montana Territory. Caleb stared at it. A cold feeling spread through his gut. How does anyone know she is here? No idea, but whoever sent it paid premium delivery rate. Caleb rode back to the ranch at full speed. He found Lily in the cookhouse preparing the midday meal, humming softly to herself. She turned when he entered, and the song died on her lips the moment she saw the telegram in his hand. The color drained from her face. "This came for you," Caleb said. Her hands were shaking when she took the telegram. She opened it, read it once, twice, 3 times. Then she crumpled it in her fist and closed her eyes. "Lily, what is going on? I have to leave. Today. Now." She moved past him toward her small room off the kitchen, already pulling off her apron. Caleb followed. "Tell me what is happening. Maybe I can help." Lily spun around, and for the first time since she had arrived at Silver Ridge, he saw real terror in her eyes. "You cannot help with this. No one can. I should never have stayed this long. I was selfish and foolish, and now—" Her voice cracked like thin ice. "Now what?" Lily pressed her hands against her face. When she lowered them, the mask she had worn for 6 weeks was gone. "My name is not really Lily Ashford," she said. "It is Lillian Mercer. I am from Boston. My father is Edmund Mercer, a textile merchant. 2 years ago, he arranged my marriage to a man named Silas Blackwood." She paused, steadying her breathing. "Blackwood is not just a businessman, Caleb. He is a monster. He owns a luxury hotel in Chicago, but the hotel is a front. The real business happens in the basement and the back rooms. People disappear into his operation. Young women mostly, taken from their families or bought from desperate situations, forced into labor, sold, shipped to places where no one will ever find them." Caleb stood very still. His face had gone hard in a way that Lily had not seen before. Not angry exactly, something deeper than anger, something ancient and protective that lived in the bedrock of who he was. "How do you know this?" "Because the night before our wedding, I went to his warehouse to surprise him. I found a door I was not supposed to open. Behind it were rooms, and in those rooms were people, locked in, terrified. Some of them were barely older than Wes." Her voice had gone flat, the way voices go when the memories are too sharp to hold with any emotion. "I went to the police. They pretended to listen. They took my statement. 2 days later, one of Blackwood's men came to my apartment and told me I had 24 hours to leave Chicago, or I would disappear the same way those people had disappeared." "So you ran?" "My lawyer, a man named Thomas Colton, the only honest person I knew in Chicago, helped me escape the city. His wife, Margaret, she is a journalist. She promised to keep investigating while I stayed alive long enough to testify. I have been running ever since, moving every few months, never staying anywhere long enough to care about anyone." She looked at Caleb, and the pain in her eyes was so raw it made his chest ache. "Until here, until I made the mistake of caring about this place, about these men, about—" She stopped herself, but they both knew what word came next. "And Blackwood wants you back," Caleb said slowly, putting the pieces together. "Not just because you can testify against him." "No, not just because of that." Lily's voice dropped to something barely audible. "He wanted me as his wife because I was untouched, a virgin from a respectable family, the perfect cover for a man who needed society to see him as legitimate. My father sold me to him, Caleb. Not with chains, but with a contract. An arranged marriage to save the family business from debt." She wrapped her arms around herself. "When I ran, I did not just escape a criminal. I humiliated him in front of everyone who mattered. A bride running away on the eve of her wedding. But what I saw in that warehouse, that is what makes me truly dangerous to him. I am a witness, and now the telegram says he knows where I am. He is coming. He is bringing men. 3 days. She paused, and something dark crossed her face. "Blackwood has had men looking for me since I left Chicago. Private investigators hired trackers. One of them must have picked up my trail in Helena. And once Blackwood had a general area, he went to my father. My father confirmed it. He gave Blackwood the exact location." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The cookhouse was silent except for the pop of wood in the stove and the distant sound of wind moving through the pines. Every rational thought in Caleb's mind told him to let her go. His father's voice was screaming at him from beyond the grave. This was exactly what the old man had warned about. Trusting the wrong person. Getting tangled in someone else's disaster. Caleb's father had died in this very house 3 years ago, sitting in his chair by the fire alone, except for Caleb. The old man's last words had been characteristically blunt. Do not let them take the ranch, son, and do not trust anyone who tells you they are different. They are all the same. But when Caleb looked at Lily, at this woman who had survived 2 years of terror and still chose to be kind, who had walked into his ruined kitchen and his ruined life and rebuilt both with nothing but skill and stubbornness, he realized something his father had never understood. His father had been right about many things, right about the land, right about hard work, but he had been wrong about the one thing that mattered most. He had been wrong about people. Not all of them, but some of them. The right ones. Some people were worth the risk. Some people were worth everything. How long until he gets here? Lily blinked. What? How long until this Blackwood arrives? The telegram says 3 days, but Caleb, you cannot. 3 days. Caleb calculated quickly. That is enough time to prepare. Caleb, no, you do not understand. Silas Blackwood is not just dangerous. He is powerful. He has money connections, trained killers. You are risking everything you have for someone you barely know. I know enough. Caleb's voice was firm as mountain stone. I know you are honest. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know you could have kept running, but you stayed here and helped save this ranch when you had no reason to. But your father's rule, never trust people. My father died alone and bitter because he could not tell the difference between people who would hurt him and people who would help him. I am not making that same mistake. His voice changed then, softened in a way that Lily had never heard from him before. Lily, you are the best thing that has happened to this ranch in years. Maybe the best thing that has happened to me. I am not letting anyone take that away without a fight. Tears rolled down Lily's cheeks. You are going to get yourself killed for a woman you have known 6 weeks. Runs in the family. My father fought a grizzly once for a mullah he had known 3 days. At least you are better company. Despite everything, Lily laughed. It was a broken, watery sound, but it was real. That night, after Caleb called the crew together and explained the situation, after every man chose to stay, after Holt said the words that made her cry all over again, that Lily fed us when we were hungry and treated us like family, and that makes this our fight. Lily stood in the doorway of the barn, watching these men pledge to risk their lives for her. Why? She whispered to Caleb as the men dispersed to begin fortifying the ranch. Why would they do this? Because you showed them what a family feels like, Caleb said quietly, and families protect their own. The words hit Lily somewhere deep in a place she had sealed off the night she ran from Chicago. She had told herself she would never have a family, that belonging to people was a luxury she could not afford. But standing in this barn, she realized she had already broken her own rule. She belonged here. These people were hers. That night, Lily sat alone in her small room and composed a telegram. Not a letter, a telegram, because there was no time for mail. She addressed it to Margaret Colton in Chicago. In as few words as the form would allow, she described where Silver Ridge Ranch was located, that Blackwood was arriving in 3 days, and that the evidence she had carried for 2 years was ready to be delivered to federal authorities. She told Maggie to contact the U.S. Marshal's office immediately. She also wrote one final line. If something happens to me, Maggie, make sure the world knows what Blackwood did. Make sure those people were not forgotten. She gave the telegram to Holt at first light with instructions to ride to town and send it immediately. Holt looked at the paper, then at Lily, then nodded without asking a single question. As she watched him ride out through the ranch gates, Lily stood on the porch of the cookhouse with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold mountain morning. 3 days. In 3 days, every choice she had made over the past 2 years would come down to a single confrontation on this remote piece of Montana wilderness. She was not waiting to be saved. She was not hoping for rescue. She was planning to win, because hope is what you do when you have given up. And Lily Ashford, who was really Lillian Mercer, who would one day be Lily Hawk, had not given up on anything. Not on justice for the people Blackwood had destroyed. Not on this battered ranch that had become her home. And not on the stubborn mountain man who had looked at $20,000 in a dying ranch and a woman full of secrets and chosen her. 3 days passed like a held breath. Lily spent every hour preparing, not just for the fight, but for what came after. She cooked enough food to last a week in case the ranch was under siege. She organized ammunition. She helped the crew fortify defensive positions around the main house and the cookhouse, stacking hay bales and overturning wagons to create barriers. She showed Wes how to load a rifle with one hand in case his other hand was occupied, and the boy practiced until his fingers were raw. At night, when the ranch was quiet and the men were sleeping in shifts, Lily sat in the cookhouse by candlelight and went over her evidence one more time. The list of names she had memorized from Blackwood's ledgers, the shipping routes, the dates, the corrupt officials. She had carried this information in her head for 2 years, turning it over and over like prayer beads, terrified of forgetting a single detail because those details were the only weapon she had. She also thought about what would happen if Maggie did not receive her telegram in time, if the federal authorities did not come, if it was just Caleb and his cowboys against Blackwood's professional killers. She did not sleep much those 3 days. None of them did. On the morning of the third day, Caleb found her in the garden she had planted, standing among the barely visible rows of seeds that had not yet broken through the soil. "They will grow," Caleb said, coming up beside her. "I know they will. I am just wondering if I will be here to see it." "You will be here. You cannot promise that." "I just did." Lily looked at him, and the morning light caught the angles of his face in a way that made something ache behind her ribs. "Caleb, I need you to know something. Whatever happens today, whatever Blackwood says or offers, I want you to know that the last 6 weeks have been the happiest of my life. I did not expect that. I did not come here looking for happiness. I came here looking for a place to hide. But what I found was something better. Lily, let me finish. I found a bon vivant. For the first time since my mother died, I found a place where I belong. And that is because of you. Because you let me in when you had every reason to shut the door." Caleb reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her deliberately, not a brush of fingers passing a plate, but a real and intentional act. His hand was rough and calloused and enormous around hers, and Lily felt the warmth of it travel all the way up her arm and settle somewhere near her heart. "Nobody is taking you from this ranch," he said. "Not today, not ever." Then Holt's voice shattered the silence. "Riders coming, 607, coming up the South Road." Caleb released Lily's hand and his face changed. The softness vanished. What replaced it was something ancient and hard, the face of a man whose ancestors had survived these mountains by knowing when to fight and when to run. This was not a time for running. "Get inside," he told Lily. "Stay in the cookhouse until this is over." "I am not hiding." "Lily, please. I need to know you are safe so I can think clearly." She looked at him for one long moment, then nodded. Not because she was obedient, but because she understood strategy. Her place was not on the porch with a rifle. Her place was inside near the evidence, ready to act when the moment came. She went into the cookhouse. She stood at the window, and she watched. Silas Blackwood did not look like a monster. That was the first thing Lily noticed as she watched him dismount in the ranch yard, and it was the thing that had always made him so dangerous. He looked like money. Tailored suit despite 2 days of trail dust. Polished boots, silver watch chain catching the light, clean-shaven jaw, and intelligent eyes that took in everything and gave back nothing. He was 50 years old and moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. The 6 men with him were a different species entirely. Hard faces, cold eyes, hands resting on sidearms with the casual familiarity of men who use them often. Caleb stepped off the porch with his rifle cradled in his arms. Not aimed, not threatening, just present. Holt and 2 other cowboys flanked him, armed and watchful. "Mr. Hawk, I presume." Blackwood's voice was smooth and cultured, the voice of ballrooms and business deals and polite society. "Silas Blackwood, I believe you have something that belongs to me. I do not recall taking anything of yours." "No, then perhaps the woman currently in your cookhouse would like to clarify the situation. Miss Mercer and I have unfinished business. Miss Ashford is my employee. Whatever business you think you have with her does not concern this ranch." Blackwood pulled out a cigar and took his time lighting it. The gesture was deliberate, theatrical. A man showing that he did not consider anyone here a threat worth rushing for. "I am a reasonable man, Mr. Hawk. I understand you were simply deceived by a convincing young woman. Lillian has a talent for making people believe she is something she is not, so I am prepared to be generous." He reached into his jacket and produced a thick envelope. He set it on the porch rail with the delicacy of a man placing a bet he knew he would win. $20,000. More than enough to save your struggling ranch and hire 10 cooks better than her. Lily watched from the cookhouse window. She could see the number register on Caleb's face, the involuntary flinch of a man who understood exactly what $20,000 meant for a ranch drowning in debt. She could see Holt shift nervously behind him. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. "That is a lot of money," Caleb said carefully. "It is. All you have to do is walk away. Go inside, pour yourself a drink, and let me handle my business with Miss Mercer. By morning, she will be on her way back to Chicago where she belongs, and you will be a wealthy man." "What happens to her in Chicago?" Blackwood's smile widened. "That is not your concern." "I'm making it my concern. Mr. Hawk, I do not think you understand the situation. I am offering you a fortune for a woman you have known for a few weeks. A woman who lied to you about her name, her past, everything she is. Surely even a stubborn mountain man can see the smart choice here." Lily gripped the window frame. She could see Caleb glance back toward the cookhouse. Their eyes met through the glass, and in that single look she saw everything she needed to know. "No," Caleb said. Blackwood's expression hardened. "Excuse me?" "I said no. Lily stays here. You and your men leave. Now. Do not be a fool, Hawk. $20,000. I do not care if it is 100,000. She is not for sale." Caleb raised his rifle slight to him. "You have got 30 seconds to get off my land." Blackwood stared at him for a long, cold moment. Then he laughed. It was a brittle sound like glass cracking. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. I own judges, police chiefs, half the politicians in Illinois. I could have warrants issued for Lillian's arrest by tomorrow morning. Then do it. We will see how far your warrants reach in Montana territory. Or I could simply take what is mine by force. 6 trained professionals against a handful of cowboys. How do you think that ends?" "Badly for all of us," Caleb admitted. "But you will lose men, expensive men, and you might lose yourself. Worth it for one woman who knows your secrets." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "I will give you 1 hour to reconsider. After that, we are coming in." He remounted his horse and rode back down the road with his men. Caleb lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking. "Boss," Holt said quietly, "that was either the bravest thing I have ever seen or the stupidest. Still figuring that out myself." Lily emerged from the cookhouse. When she reached Caleb, she stopped and looked at his face. Really looked at it. The way you look at something you are afraid to lose. "You turned down $20,000, she said quietly. "Was not mine to take. Most men would have taken it anyway. I am not most men." "No," and her voice cracked like dry wood. "You are really not." They had 1 hour, maybe less. The crew gathered and Caleb laid out the situation. 6 professional gunmen, coming back to take Lily by force. "Last chance," Caleb said. "Anyone who wants to ride out, do it now, no judgment." Nobody moved. "What do we have that they do not?" Wes asked. The boy was pale but trying so hard to look like a man. "A reason to fight that is bigger than money," Caleb said. "The attack came before the hour was up. Blackwood was not a patient man." Lily heard the horses first, then saw shapes moving in the darkness. More than 6. Blackwood had brought reinforcements. Caleb fired a warning shot into the air. "This is private property. Turn around or the next shot will not be a warning." Someone laughed in the darkness. Then gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once. The next 20 minutes were the worst of Lily's life. Bullets tore into wood. Horses screamed. Men shouted commands that were swallowed by the chaos. From inside the cookhouse, Lily could hear Caleb firing and reloading steady as a heartbeat. Then Wes cried out, a sharp, startled sound of pain. Lily did not think. She grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove and ran toward the main house. Bullets struck the ground near her feet, but fear had become something she could no longer feel. There was only forward. She found Wes on the porch clutching his left shoulder. Blood was spreading across his shirt. Caleb was crouched beside him, pressing a hand against the wound. "I'm okay, Wes gasped. Just grazed me. But he was not okay. He was 15 years old and bleeding on the porch of a ranch that was under siege because of her. Fall back, Caleb shouted. Everyone into the main house, now. The crew retreated, covering each other. They barricaded the doors and windows. Lily immediately went to work on Wes's shoulder, tearing strips from her skirt to make bandages. It is not deep, she told him gently. You are going to be fine, Wes. I thought I was tough, the boy said through gritted teeth. Thought I could handle anything. Being tough is not about never being afraid. It is about being afraid and staying anyway. Then flames appeared on the barn roof. Blackwood's men had set it on fire. The oldest building on the ranch, the barn Caleb's father had built with his own hands 30 years ago, erupted in orange and red against the night sky. No, Caleb moved toward the door, but Lily stopped him. It is what they want. You go out there, they will shoot you down. The horses. Listen. Through the roar of the fire, they could hear hoofbeats. Holt had opened the corral gates. The horses were running free, scattering into the darkness away from the flames, alive. In the orange glow, Lily could see Blackwood, standing well back from the fighting, watching his men do the dirty work. The coward. He had always been a coward. A voice inside the house said what everyone was thinking. We need to negotiate before the whole ranch burns. There is nothing to negotiate, Lily said. He wants me. That is all he has ever wanted. Caleb turned to her. What are you thinking? I am thinking that I have been running for 2 years and everywhere I go, people get hurt because of me. No, absolutely not. We are not handing you over. Caleb, look around. Wes is bleeding. Your barn is on fire. Your ranch is being destroyed. You stayed because I asked you to, because this place needed you, because He stopped, aware of every man in the room listening. Because you what? Lily asked softly. Before he could answer, the front door exploded inward. 2 of Blackwood's men had broken through the back entrance at the same time. Fighting erupted inside the house. Caleb grappled with a man twice his size, took a fist to the jaw, tasted blood. Then Lily was there. The cast iron skillet connected with the attacker's skull with a sound like a church bell, and the man went down hard. That is for threatening my cowboys, she said, breathing hard. In the chaos, nobody noticed one of Blackwood's men grab Wes and press a gun to the boy's head. Everyone stop or the boy dies. The room froze. Silas Blackwood stepped through the shattered doorway, brushing dust from his suit. That is better. Now we can talk like civilized people. Let him go, Caleb said. He is just a kid. Then perhaps you should have considered that before dragging children into adult problems. Blackwood's gaze found Lily. It is time to end this, Lillian. You are coming back to Chicago with me. Cooperate and the ranch survives. Young Wes keeps his life. Lily looked at Wes, 15 years old, terrified, bleeding, but still trying to be brave. She looked at Caleb, and the expression on his face was one she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Something that looked like a man watching the thing he loved most being taken from him. If I go with you, Lily said slowly, you will leave the ranch alone. Leave all these people alone. You have my word. Your word means nothing. I need more than that. I will put it in writing, a legal document stating I have no claim against Silver Ridge Ranch or its people. Manufactured charges, Lily said flatly when Blackwood mentioned the warrants. Of course they are manufactured, but they are also legal. Sign an agreement promising never to speak about what you claim to have seen. Return to Chicago quietly. Lily's shoulders sagged. It was not defeat. It was the performance of defeat. Because underneath her despair, her mind was working. Counting the hours since Holt had ridden to town with her telegram. Calculating how far the message had traveled. Estimating whether Maggie Colton had received it and acted. She needed time. She needed Blackwood to believe he had won. Let me say goodbye, she said. Lily, no. Caleb started forward. It is over, Caleb. She looked at him with eyes that were saying something her mouth could not. Trust me, please. Trust me the way I have learned to trust you. I am sorry. I am so sorry I brought this to your door. She moved toward Blackwood. As she walked, she slipped her hand inside her dress and retrieved the folded pages she had kept hidden since the telegram arrived. The list of names, the dates, the evidence that could destroy Blackwood's empire. She pressed the pages flat against her body where his men would not think to look. This was not surrender, this was strategy. Blackwood grabbed her arm. His fingers were cold, and the touch sent a wave of revulsion through her. Excellent choice, my dear. Now, Mr. Hawk, if you and your men would be so kind as to drop your weapons. The explosion came from outside, a massive boom that shook the house and lit up the night brighter than the burning barn. Everyone rushed to the windows. 3 wagons were on fire, the wagons that Blackwood's reinforcements had arrived in. And standing near them, holding a torch in one hand and a rifle in the other, was a woman with red hair and the bearing of someone who had been waiting her entire career for this moment. "Who the hell is that?" Blackwood demanded. Lily's heart nearly burst. "Margaret. Margaret Colton. She is a journalist. And if she is here, that means—" More riders appeared on the rear ridge above the ranch. They wore badges that caught the firelight. Federal marshals. 6 of them armed and positioned to cut off any escape. Blackwood's face went white. "That is impossible. I own the Chicago police." "You own judges in Chicago," Maggie Colton shouted from the road. "You forget about federal investigators. And you definitely forgot about me documenting every corrupt official you have ever bribed." She held up a leather satchel. 5 months of investigation, names, dates, bank records, everything. The lead marshal dismounted, a grizzled man with a face like weathered granite. "Silas Blackwood, you are under arrest. The charges will take a while to read, so I will summarize. You are done." Blackwood's hired men dropped their weapons immediately, but Blackwood still had Lily's arm in his grip. "I will hurt her," he said. "I swear I will." Caleb crossed the distance in 3 strides and hit Blackwood with every ounce of strength he had. The man went down like a felled tree, releasing Lily. "That is for burning my barn," Caleb said, standing over him. The marshals hauled Blackwood to his feet and clamped irons on his wrists. But before they pulled him away, Blackwood turned his head and locked eyes with Lily. "Your father told me where you were, Lillian. Your own father sold you to me. Again." The words landed like bullets. Lily felt them hit, felt them tear through everything she had been holding together. Her father, Edmund Mercer, the man she had, despite everything, still harbored some small hope, might be looking for her out of love. He had not been looking for her to save her. He had been looking for her to sell her. Again. Caleb was beside her, immediately holding her up. "I lost my family," she whispered. "I lost my real family." "You have a family here, Lily, right here." Maggie ran to them and the 2 women embraced. "It is over," Maggie said. "Really over. The people he held captive, they have been freed. His entire operation is being taken apart. And your evidence, Lily, the list you sent me in that telegram, it filled in every gap in the federal case. You did this. You saved them." The marshals finished securing Blackwood's men. The lead marshal, Carson, approached Caleb. "Mr. Hawk, there will be an investigation into tonight's events. Self-defense is one thing. I suggest you get a lawyer." After the marshals rode out, the crew stood in the yard surveying the devastation. The barn was a total loss. The house had bullet holes in every wall. 3 horses were missing. And Wes sat on the porch steps, pale and hurting. Lily wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and became the person she always became when the world fell apart. The person who acted. "We need to get Wes to a doctor. The nearest one is in town. We ride double. Pete, you are the strongest. You take Wes. Caleb and I will follow." The doctor in town was a stern woman named Dr. Ruth Pennington, who took one look at Wes and started working without asking unnecessary questions. For 2 hours, she cleaned the wound, extracted fragments, and stitched the boy back together while Lily assisted calm and steady. "He is lucky," Dr. Pennington said when she finished. "Another inch in either direction, and we would be having a very different conversation." The sun was rising when they walked outside, and that was when Howard Greer appeared, the banker. "Mr. Hawk, I heard about your troubles. Terrible business." The smile never reached his eyes. "I am calling in your full loan, $3,000, due in 30 days or the bank forecloses on Silver Ridge Ranch." Lily stepped forward. "You cannot do that?" "Business is not about fault, my dear. It is about risk." Greer tipped his hat. 30 days, Mr. Hawk." Caleb's face crumbled with the specific kind of despair that comes from surviving a battle only to discover you have already lost the war. "How much?" Lily asked quietly. $3,000. I took the loan 2 years ago. 3,000 all at once." He laughed without joy. "I would need a miracle." or a plan. Lily, there is no plan that makes $3,000 appear in 30 days. Something hardened inside her, the same thing that had hardened the night she saw people locked in Blackwood's warehouse, the thing that turned fear into fuel. I just lost my father, Lily said. The man who was supposed to protect me sold me to a monster. Twice. I have nothing left of my old life. But I have this ranch. I have these people. And I will not lose them too. She looked Caleb in the eye. What if we move up the cattle drive the herd directly to the railhead at Billings instead of waiting for buyers to come to us? That is 300 miles through rough country. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Early spring drives are dangerous. And staying here means losing the ranch for certain. At least the drive gives us a chance. Caleb stared at her. You are serious. I have never been more serious about anything. You asked me once if I was planning to win or just hoping. I am planning. Are you with me? We do the drive, he said, but we do it smart. They returned to the ranch and spent the next week in a frenzy of preparation. 200 head of cattle, half wild from a hard winter, had to be gathered from the far pastures and driven into the holding corrals. It was brutal work. The animals had spent months roaming free in the mountain meadows and resented every inch of ground they were forced to give up. They kicked and bolted and charged at the horses, and more than once, a cowboy ended up in the dirt with nothing to show for it but bruises and a string of curses. Caleb and the crew worked from dawn to dark, riding into ravines and climbing ridgelines to flush out strays. Lily organized everything else. She negotiated supplies down to the cent, using every skill she had learned managing Blackwood's kitchen budget. She calculated exactly how much food they would need for 3 weeks on the trail and prepared it all herself, drying meat over slow fires, baking hardtack in batches, packing beans and coffee and salt in waterproof canvas bundles that could withstand rain and river crossings. She made lists for every mile of the journey: water sources, river crossings, potential campsites. She talked to every old-timer in town who had made the Billings run and wrote down everything they told her. If they were going to attempt this insane drive, they were going to do it with a plan for every possible disaster. Wes insisted on coming. I took a bullet for this ranch. I am seeing it through. You are 15 with one working arm, Caleb argued, and you need every hand you can get. I can ride. I can rope with one arm if I have to. Lily looked at Caleb. He is part of this crew. His choice, Onkiwes. 3 days before departure, Maggie returned with news. The federal government was offering a reward for Blackwood's conviction, $10,000, but it would not be paid until after the trial, which could take months. She handed Lily an envelope. This is from the people you helped free. They pooled what little money they had. Inside was $300 and a letter. Lily read it twice, tears falling onto the paper. What does it say? Caleb asked. It says thank you. It says I gave them hope when they had none. Her voice broke. It says they are praying for me. $300, Holt said quietly. That is a start. It is more than a start, Lily said, wiping her eyes. It is a reminder of why we fight. The night before the cattle drive, Caleb found Lily in the cookhouse packing the last supplies. You do not have to come, he said. It is going to be dangerous. Are you trying to protect me or get rid of me? Protect you always. I do not need protection, Caleb. I need to be part of this. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. I am scared. Scared we will fail. Scared I will lose you. Fear is just love with nowhere to go, Lily said softly. You are afraid because you care. That is not weakness. That is what makes you strong. She smiled up at him, and in the lamplight of the cookhouse, Caleb Hawk kissed Lily Ashford for the first time. It was not a gentle kiss. It was the kind of kiss that happens when two people have been holding back for too long and suddenly cannot hold back anymore. When they finally pulled apart, Lily rested her forehead against his chest. Promise me something, Caleb said. What? Promise me that no matter what happens on this drive, you will remember that you are the reason this ranch is still standing. I love you, she said. The words came out before she could stop them. I know it is too soon, but if something happens on this drive, I need you to know. I love you too, Caleb said. I have loved you since the day you walked into my kitchen and told me I was incompetent. She laughed through her tears. That is a terrible love story. It is the only one I have got. At dawn, they mounted up, 8 cowboys, 1 cook who was so much more than a cook, and 200 head of half-wild Montana cattle. They had 3 weeks to cover 300 miles, navigate dangerous terrain, and get to Billings before the bank took everything. The odds were terrible. The risks were enormous. But as Caleb looked at Lily riding beside him, fierce and fearless, and completely committed to this insane plan, he realized something his father had never understood. The best things in life were always worth risking everything for. The first day they lost 12 head. The animals were spooked and half-feral, bolting at shadows and scattering whenever the wind shifted. No amount of skilled herding could keep them all together when a stubborn steer decided to make a run for freedom. By nightfall, the crew was exhausted, frustrated, and starting to wonder if the whole plan was suicide. 12 cattle is 12% of our profit, Holt said grimly as they made camp. Tomorrow we will do better, Lily said, stirring beans over the trail fire. Her voice carried a certainty that the men needed to hear, even if she was not entirely sure she felt it. The cattle will settle. We will find our rhythm. And if we do not, we adapt. That is what we do. She looked at each man around the fire. These people who had given up steady pay and safe work to follow a mountain man and his cook into the wilderness on a desperate gamble. They deserve better than doubt. They deserve someone who believed. Day 2 brought a spring storm. Freezing rain that turned the ground to mud and made the cattle even more skittish. They lost 8 more head when lightning spooked the herd and sent them scattering in 3 directions. It took 3 hours to round them back up, and by then everyone was soaked freezing and questioning every decision that had led them to this point. "This is insane," Pete muttered that night, wringing water from his hat. "Then go back," Caleb said. "Nobody is forcing you to stay." Pete looked stung, but he did not leave. None of them did, though Caleb could see the doubt growing in their eyes like frost on a window. That night, Lily found him standing watch over the herd, staring into the darkness. "You are pushing them too hard," she said softly. "I am pushing everyone too hard, including you. I can handle it. Can you, Lily? You are cooking for 8 people over an open fire in freezing rain. You are tending Wes's wound. You are keeping track of supplies. And you are trying to hold everyone together when you should be focused on your own survival. Is that what you think I am doing? Trying to hold everyone together. Are you not?" Lily stepped closer. "I am fighting for our future, Caleb. Not just yours, ours. Every mile we cover is 1 mile closer to saving the ranch, to building something real together. That is not charity. That is investment. What if we fail? Then we figure something else out. But we do not fail by trying, we only fail by giving up." Day 3 brought on the river. The Yellowstone was running high and fast from snowmelt, 100 yards of churning brown water that stood between them and the trail south. There was no way around it. They had to cross here or lose days going upstream to find a better ford, and they did not have days to lose. "We should wait," Holt said, studying the current with the practiced eye of a man who had seen rivers kill before. "Let the water settle." "We do not have time to wait," Lily said before Caleb could answer. "We are already behind schedule. Every day we lose is a day closer to losing the ranch. We crossed today." They spent an hour preparing, tying gear tight, planning the safest route across, organizing who would lead the cattle and who would guard the flanks to keep them from being swept downstream. Caleb went first, riding his horse into the current to show the cattle it could be done. The cold hit him like a hammer. The current was stronger than he had anticipated, pulling at his horse, threatening to sweep them both downstream. But he kept going, kept fighting, and finally reached the other side. "It is manageable," he shouted back. But Lily could see his face, and manageable was a generous word for what he had just survived. They started driving the cattle across. The first 50 head went smoothly enough. The animals followed the leader, swam awkwardly but steadily, and made it to the far bank. Lily started to think maybe they would get lucky. Then a steer panicked midstream, thrashing wildly, and suddenly 20 cattle were fighting the current instead of swimming with it. Cowboys rode in to help, but the chaos spread faster than they could contain it. "Pull back," Holt screamed. "Let them go." But Wes did not pull back. He rode straight into the mess, trying to rope a drowning calf with his one good arm. His horse lost its footing on the slippery river bottom. Suddenly, both horse and rider were underwater, being swept downstream by the current. Lily screamed his name and spurred her horse into the river without a second thought. She fought the current, the freezing water closing over her legs, her horse struggling beneath her. She reached Wes just as he surfaced for what might have been the last time, grabbed his collar with a strength she did not know she possessed, and held on. The boy was dead weight against the current, barely conscious, his wounded shoulder leaking fresh blood into the brown water. For one terrible moment, the river tried to take them both. The current pulled at them like a living thing, hungry and patient, and absolutely indifferent to how hard they had fought to get this far. Lily's horse stumbled, went down to its knees in the riverbed, and Lily felt the water close over her chest, felt the cold squeeze the air from her lungs. Then Holt's rope came sailing across the water like a lifeline thrown by God himself. It caught her saddle horn and went taut, and the crew hauled on it from the shore, men digging their boots into the mud and pulling with everything they had. Other cowboys formed a human chain, wading in to grab at reins and arms and anything they could reach, until finally, gasping and shaking, Lily and Wes and the horse were on solid ground. Wes coughed up river water, choking and retching. His wounded shoulder was bleeding again, worse than before, the stitches torn open by the violence of the current. "You stupid, brave boy," Lily whispered, pulling him against her. She was soaked and freezing and shaking so hard she could barely hold him, but she held him anyway. "But I saved the calf," Wes managed weakly. Sure enough, the calf was struggling onto the shore nearby, alive, because a 15-year-old boy with a bullet wound was too stubborn to let it drown. They lost 32 head in that crossing, nearly a fifth of the herd gone in minutes. They were down to 150 cattle, nowhere near enough to pay off the loan. That night, Wes's fever spiked from infection. Lily worked through the night using every herb and remedy she knew, refusing to sleep while the boy burned. She made compresses from wild sage she found growing along the riverbank. She kept cool cloths on his forehead and warm blankets on his body, and talked to him through the delirious hours, telling him stories about the ranch they were going to build, the life they were going to have when this was all over. Caleb sat with them, wiping the boy's forehead, watching Lily fight for this child's life with the same ferocity she brought to everything. He had never seen anyone so tired and so determined at the same time. She had not slept in 36 hours. Her hands were cracked and raw. Her clothes were still damp from the river, and she was not going to stop. "We need a real doctor," Lily said at one point, her voice tight with worry. "If this infection spreads, nearest town is 40 miles north, 2 days there and back. Then we keep going forward, and I keep him alive." "Do not let them take the ranch," Wes mumbled in his fever, his eyes unfocused and glassy. "Promise me, boss. Don't let them take it." "I promise, son." "Miss Lily, I am right here, Wes. You are the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. Boss knows it. We all know it." Lily pressed her lips together hard to keep from crying. "You rest now. Save your strength for tomorrow." Somewhere around 3 in the morning, the fever broke. Wes opened his eyes, weak but lucid, looking up at them with tired eyes. "Did we lose the herd?" he whispered. "Not yet," Lily said, her voice raw from exhaustion and emotion. "We are still fighting." "Good, that is good." Wes closed his eyes again. "Do not stop fighting, not ever." By day 7, they had fallen into a brutal rhythm. Wake before dawn. Drive the cattle until they could not take another step. Make camp, tend the wounded, sleep a few hours, repeat. The landscape was unforgiving. Rocky terrain that tore up the cattle's hooves, thorny brush that cut the horses. Then they encountered another cattle drive heading the opposite direction. 200 head meeting, 200 head on a narrow trail. Both foremen squared up, hands on weapons, ready for a confrontation that could turn violent fast. "You are supposed to yield to the northbound drive," the other foreman said. "That is trail law." "We cannot afford to yield," Caleb replied. "We are on a deadline." "So are we. Get your cattle off the trail or we drive right through them." Lily rode forward, positioning herself between the two angry men before the situation could escalate further. "Gentlemen, fighting will not move either herd faster. Split the trail. Your cattle west, ours east. We move slowly past each other. Everyone keeps their livestock and nobody dies today." The other foreman looked at her. "Who are you?" "Someone who is tired of men solving problems with fists when there are smarter ways." It worked. 3 hours, 2 lost cattle. A miracle considering how badly it could have gone. That night around the fire, Caleb reached for Lily's hand and held it without saying a word. Some things did not need words. After everything they had survived, the simple act of sitting together in the firelight alive and still fighting said more than any declaration could. Then morning came, and with it, the discovery that 20 cattle had been stolen in the night by rustlers who had watched a tired crew sleep through their raid. 128 head left, thousands of dollars short, and Billings was still 2 days away. Lily did not waste time on despair. She had spent 2 years learning that despair was a luxury she could not afford, and the discovery of 20 stolen cattle was not going to change that lesson now. "We go after them," Caleb said, staring at the tracks that led north from the camp. His voice was flat and dangerous. "How many?" Lily asked, already crouching beside the tracks, reading the ground the way Holt had taught on her during the first week on the trail. "4 riders, maybe 5. They cut the cattle out clean." "They are not professionals," Holt said, studying the hoofprints. "Professionals would have hidden their tracks. These are opportunists." "Then we take it back." Caleb reached for his saddle. "Holt, you take the main herd and keep moving toward Billings. Lily, stay with the herd. Pete and I will—" "No," Caleb stopped. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I am coming with you." Lily was already tightening the cinch on her horse. "You need someone watching your back, and I am a better shot than Pete." "No offense, Pete." Pete shrugged. "None taken. She is." "Lily, this is not a negotiation." "You are right, it is not. We are wasting time. Those rustlers have 6 hours on us, and every minute we stand here arguing is another minute they get farther away with our future." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He had learned that arguing with Lily Ashford was like arguing with weather. "Fine, Holt, take 5 men and keep the herd moving. Lily, Pete, you are with me. We ride light, we ride fast." They rode hard through rough country, following tracks that the rustlers had not bothered to conceal. 6 hours into the chase, they smelled wood smoke. Then they saw the cattle, 20 head, bunched together in a makeshift corral of fallen timber. And beyond the cattle, 4 men sitting around a fire cooking breakfast with the ease of people who did not expect consequences. One of them was wearing a hat that looked suspiciously like it belonged to one of Caleb's missing ranch hands, which meant they had probably been watching Silver Ridge for days, waiting for the crew to be vulnerable. Lily studied them from behind a boulder. 4 men armed but relaxed. Their horses were hobbled nearby. No lookout posted, no defensive positions. These were not hardened outlaws. These were opportunists who had seen exhausted people and decided to take what they could not earn. "Amateurs," she whispered. "Amateurs with our cattle," Caleb said, barely contained. "I am going in." Lily put her hand on his arm, firm and deliberate. "Caleb, listen to me. Rushing and angry is how people die. I have seen it. I watched Blackwood's men make that mistake." She held his gaze. "We wait until dark. We plan. We win smart. Those are our cattle, Lily. That is our ranch, our future. And we will get all of it back. But we will do it alive. Dark is 3 hours away." The waiting was agony. They lay on their stomachs behind the ridge and watched the rustlers eat stolen beef and laugh. "Why do people steal?" Caleb asked quietly. "Because they are desperate, or lazy, or because they never learned that easy money always costs someone else everything." She looked at him. "But we are not like them. We earn what we have. We fight for it. And that is why we will win." When darkness settled, they moved. Lily had spent the 3 hours planning every step. Pete circled south to the horse line. Lily took the east side. Caleb came in from the north. Pete reached the guard and knocked him unconscious without a sound. Then Caleb stepped into the firelight with his rifle raised. "Hands up, nice and slow." 3 men scrambled to their feet. Caleb fired a shot into the dirt at their feet. "Next one goes through flesh. Your choice." They froze. One of them found his voice. "Who are you, Beemanton?" "The man whose cattle you stole." Lily stepped out of the darkness on the other side, rifle leveled. "You cut them out of our herd while we slept. That is theft. And in Montana, territory cattle rustling is a hanging offense." The leader's face went pale. He had not expected a woman who held a rifle like she would not hesitate to use it. "Walk away," Lily said. Her voice was steady and cold. "Leave the cattle. Leave your weapons. Count yourselves fortunate. You cannot take our weapons. You should have thought of that before you stole from desperate people. They walked. Lily watched them disappear into the darkness, then turned to Caleb, who was looking at her with an expression that was equal parts admiration and awe. Remind me never to cross you, he said. You cross me every day. You just have not noticed because I choose to forgive you. Pete laughed so hard, he spooked 3 of the recovered cattle. They drove the 20 head through the night. By dawn, they spotted Holt and the others, and when Holt saw them coming with the full count, he grinned wide enough to crack his weathered face. Thought you were dead, boss. Not yet. 148 head. Still not enough. But Billings was half a day south. They made it with 2 hours of daylight to spare. Billings rose out of the flatlands like a promise, the railhead, the cattle pens, the buyers who would determine whether Silver Ridge lived or died. Lily's hands were shaking as they drove the cattle into the holding pens. She had not slept in 36 hours. Her clothes were caked with mud. Her hands were raw. She looked like a woman who had been through a war. She felt like one too. A cattle buyer named Morrison approached with a clipboard. You are early for the season. Most drives do not arrive for another month. We are not most drives, Caleb said. How much per head? Lily asked, stepping forward before Caleb could negotiate. She loved the man, but he could not haggle his way out of a paper sack. Morrison looked her over with mild surprise. Women did not usually do the talking at cattle sales. They are trail-worn underweight. $18 per head. Lily did the math. 148 at 18 came to $2,664. Not enough. These cattle are worth 25 per head in any market in Montana, Lily said. Maybe in better condition. Mr. Morrison, let me tell you something about this herd. These animals were driven 300 miles through early spring conditions. They survived a river crossing that killed dozens of others. They survived storms, rough terrain, and cattle thieves. The weak ones are dead. Every animal in that pen is a survivor. That is the toughest, most resilient stock you will see all year. Ranchers pay premium for cattle with that kind of endurance in their bloodline. Morrison raised an eyebrow. That is quite the sales pitch. It is not a pitch, it is the truth. These cattle forded the Yellowstone when it was running at spring flood. Half the herds in Montana could not survive that crossing, and mine did. $23 per head. 20. Lily did not blink. She did not shift her weight or look away. She had learned negotiation in the kitchens of Chicago, haggling with meat suppliers who tried to cheat her every week. She knew that the person who speaks first after a number is offered is the person who loses. So she said nothing. She just looked at Morrison with the patient certainty of a woman who knew exactly what her cattle were worth and was willing to walk away. The silence lasted 5 seconds. It felt like 5 years. 21, Morrison said. Final offer. 22 and we close right now. Morrison studied her. He looked at the cattle again. He looked at Caleb standing behind Lily with his arms crossed, content to let her work. 21. That is genuinely my final offer. Lily held his gaze for 3 heartbeats. She could push for more, but she also knew that 21 was fair, and greed turned victories into defeats. She extended her hand. Deal. 148 head at $21 each came to $3,108. Enough to pay the loan with $108 remaining. Caleb's knees buckled. He caught himself on the fence rail and Lily grabbed his arm. We won, she whispered, tears streaming. We beat them all. The bank, the rustlers, the river, everything. The crew erupted. Holt threw his hat in the air. Pete lifted Wes in a bear hug that made the boy yelp from his shoulder. Cowboys who had not smiled in weeks were whooping at the Montana sky. But Caleb was looking only at Lily, this woman who had walked into his life as a stranger and become the center of everything. Marry me, he said. The noise did not stop, but Lily went completely still. What? Marry me, right here in Billings, before we ride back. I do not want to wait another day. Caleb Hawk, that is the worst proposal I have ever heard. It is the only one I have got. Lily laughed through her tears. It was the most beautiful sound Caleb had ever heard. Then yes, yes, you stubborn, impossible, extraordinary man. I will marry you. And there in the dusty cattle pens of Billings, Montana, surrounded by exhausted cowboys and bawling cattle, Caleb kissed the woman who had saved his ranch, his crew, and his heart. They found a preacher the next morning, a small church on the edge of town. Reverend Elias Thompson was an elderly man with kind eyes. "You two look like you have been through a war," he observed. "Something like that," Caleb said. "Can you marry us today?" "Marriage is a sacred covenant, son, not something to rush into because you are flushed with cattle money." Lily stepped forward. She was still wearing her trail dress, torn and stained. Her hair was loose because she had lost her last hairpin somewhere on the Yellowstone. "Reverend, I have known this man for 2 months. In that time, I have watched him risk everything to protect people he barely knew. I have seen him choose justice over profit, loyalty over safety, and love over pride. I know more about his character after 2 months than most people learn about their husbands in 2 years. We are rushing, but we are not being reckless." The Reverend smiled. "Well then, let us get you married." The ceremony was simple. The crew stood as witnesses, trail-worn and smelling of cattle and campfire smoke, dressed in the only clothes they had. Wes held the rings they had bought that morning, simple gold bands that cost more than they should have spent, but felt necessary in a way that had nothing to do with money. When Reverend Thompson said the words, Caleb pulled Lily close and kissed her like they had all the time in the world. And for that one moment they did. "Mrs. Hawk," he whispered. "Mr. Hawk," she whispered back. Holt whooped. The crew joined in. And for one perfect suspended moment in a small church in Billings, Montana, everything was exactly right. Then there was the matter of saving the ranch. The telegraph office was their first stop after the ceremony. Caleb sent the wire to Greer's bank with hands that had stopped shaking for the first time in weeks. $3,000 transferred in full. The operator stamped a receipt and handed it across the counter. "That is it?" Caleb said, staring at the paper. $3,000, and it is done. "That is how banking works," the operator said. "You owe, you pay, the debt is gone." He glanced at Lily. "Congratulations on the wedding. Heard your wife talked Morrison up $3 on the cattle price. Whole town is talking about it." "She has many talents," Caleb said, squeezing Lily's hand. They walked out into the sunlight and stood in the street, two married people looking at each other like the world had tilted and settled into a new position, and they were still finding their balance. "We did it," Lily said. "We actually did it. We did more than that. We got married, started a whole new life." Before they could leave Billings, Caleb gathered the crew and laid out the truth. "I cannot pay proper wages right now. After the loan and supplies for the trip back, I have about $60. But what I can offer is a stake in the ranch, 5% profit sharing for core crew. More if you stay 5 years. "That is not much," Pete said. "No, but it is honest. And I promise that every person who stays will be treated like family." Wes stood up first, his bandaged shoulder stiff, but his voice steady. "I am staying. Do not even have to think about it." Holt nodded. "Me too. Too old and too ugly to start over somewhere else." 6 men stayed. 2 moved on. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "We had better not regret this," Pete said with a grin, "because we just turned down paying jobs for a man with $60. 68, Lily corrected. "I have been saving my cooking wages." The laughter broke the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. They left Billings the next morning riding light without cattle to slow them down. 15 days back to Silver Ridge through country that looked different now. Greener. More alive. Or maybe Lily was just seeing it through different eyes. The eyes of a woman who finally had something to ride toward instead of something to run from. On the 8th day, they encountered settlers who had built a cabin across what used to be open range, blocking the traditional trail. "You will need to go around," the settler said. "This is private property now. We filed a claim with the territorial office." Caleb bristled. "This was open range last month." "Not anymore. Things are changing." Caleb wanted to argue, but Lily touched his arm. "It is not worth fighting over. We have bigger things ahead of us." He let it go, but that night by the fire he was quiet, staring into the flames with the look of a man seeing the future and not entirely liking what he saw. "The West is changing," he said. "Fences everywhere. Property claims, rules. The open range I grew up with is disappearing." "Then we change with it," Lily said, poking the fire with a stick. We figure out how to make Silver Ridge work in the new West instead of holding on to the old one. That is what survivors do. Is that what we are, survivors? We are more than that. We are builders. She looked at him across the flames. We survived Blackwood. We survived the drive. We survived everything that should have destroyed us. Now we get to build something beautiful from all of it. Caleb moved around the fire and pulled her close. I love you, Lily Hawk. I love you too. Now stop brooding and help me figure out breakfast. We are almost out of beans. On the 15th day, they crested the final ridge, and Silver Ridge Ranch spread out below them in its mountain valley. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The barn was still gone, just a blackened foundation and charred timbers. But someone had cleared the debris and stacked the salvageable wood in neat piles. The main house had new boards over the broken windows. The corral had been repaired, and smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, thin and white, against the blue Montana sky. Someone is here, Holt said, his hand moving to his rifle. They rode in cautiously. What they found was Margaret Colton sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and a smile that said she had been waiting for exactly this moment. Took you long enough, Maggie called. I have been here 3 days. Lily dismounted and ran to her. The two women held each other for a long time, and Lily felt something release in her chest that she had been carrying since the night Blackwood whispered her father's betrayal. What are you doing here, bringing news and cleaning up this disaster of a ranch, which I have to say is not my area of expertise? Maggie handed Caleb an envelope. This is from the federal government. Reward for your assistance in capturing Blackwood. It is not the full $10,000 that comes after the trial, but they authorized an advance payment for cooperating witnesses. Inside was a bank draft for $2,000. $2,000, Caleb whispered. That is enough to rebuild the barn, buy equipment, stock up for winter. That is enough to give Silver Ridge a real second chance, Maggie said, which you both deserve. Then Maggie turned to Lily and her expression changed. I have more news, Lily, about your father. Lily's body went rigid. Edmund Mercer has been arrested. The federal investigators traced the communication between him and Blackwood. Your father accepted payment for revealing your location. He is being charged as an accessory. The words settled into Lily like stones dropping into deep water. She waited for the grief to come, but what came instead was something quieter. The sound of a door closing. A door she had been holding open for 2 years, hoping her father would walk through it with an apology. He never would. I am not Lily Mercer anymore, she said. Her voice was steady, clear. I am not his daughter. I am not Blackwood's runaway bride. I am Lily Hawk, and this is my home. Maggie had one more thing, letters from the people who had been freed from Blackwood's operation. They wanted you to have these. Some have found loves. Others have reconnected with their families. All of them are free because you were brave enough to speak up. Lily took the letters with trembling hands. She pressed them against her chest and felt for the first time in 2 years that her silence had not been the end of the story. Her courage had been the beginning of someone else's freedom. That night, the crew celebrated properly. Maggie had brought a case of good whiskey and enough provisions for a real feast. They ate and drank and told stories about the cattle drive until their voices were hoarse from laughing. Every disaster that had nearly killed them became a punchline. The river crossing, the storm, the rustlers, Wes riding one armed into a flood to save a calf. To Wes, Holt said, raising his glass, the kid who took a bullet and nearly drowned and still saved a calf. To Pete, Wes countered, grinning, who complained every single day but never once quit. To Lily, Caleb said quietly, and the table went still, who saved us all in more ways than I can count. Lily stood her glass in hand. No, to all of us, because we did this together. Every impossible mile, every terrible decision, every moment we thought we would fail but kept going anyway. That is what families do. They fight for each other. She looked around the table at these faces weathered and scarred and beautiful in the lamplight. And you are my family now. The men cheered. Even Maggie, who prided herself on professional detachment, wiped her eyes. Later, after everyone had found their beds and the ranch was quiet except for the sound of the creek, and the wind in the pines, Caleb and Lily stood together on the porch of the main house, looking out at their battered, bullet-scarred, fire-damaged, deeply beloved ranch. The mountains rose black against a sky full of stars, and the creek caught moonlight in its current, and somewhere in the darkness, their horses moved through the grass like shadows. "What happens now?" Lily asked. "We rebuild, slowly, carefully. We fix what is broken and make what is weak strong again." "I meant with us, with our life together." Caleb turned to face her. In the moonlight, his features were softened in a way that daylight never allowed. "I want to build something that lasts. Not just the ranch, but us. I want children someday. I want to watch Wes grow into a man. I want to help Holt retire comfortably. I want to turn this place into something we can both be proud of." That is a lot of wanting. It is, but for the first time in years, I actually believe it is possible. He took her hands. "Lily, I am not going to be easy to live with. I am stubborn and proud, and I make terrible decisions when I am afraid. I know, I have seen all of that. But I will fight for you every single day. I will choose you over pride, over fear, over every lesson my father taught me about never trusting anyone. You are my partner in everything now, and I do not take that lightly." Lily smiled. "Good, because I plan to hold you to every word." They kissed under the Montana stars. Two people who had been broken by their pasts, but refused to let that brokenness become their future. The rebuilding took months. The new barn rose bigger and stronger than the original. Lily designed it herself, drawing plans on the back of old supply receipts, calculating dimensions with the same precision she brought to everything. She had never built a barn before, but she had managed a kitchen that served 300 people a night, and she understood systems. A barn was just another system. Inputs and outputs, load-bearing walls and drainage and airflow. She studied every barn within riding distance, asked questions that made ranchers twice her age scratch their heads, and came back with a design that was practical and elegant and exactly right for what Silver Ridge needed. The crew worked from dawn to dusk, and when the last beam was in place and the roof was sealed against the coming winter, they stood together in the yard and looked at what they had made. The barn was not just a building, it was proof that destruction was not the end of a story. It was proof that the same ground that held ashes could hold foundations. "Your father would be proud," Lily told Caleb. "My father would have said it was too big. It is exactly the right size for what we are going to become." The $10,000 reward arrived by wire 3 weeks after Blackwood's conviction, and Lily sat with Caleb at the kitchen table and planned how to spend every dollar. New breeding stock, fencing materials, a windmill for the north pasture, medical supplies, books for Wes, seeds for the spring garden. They argued over every line item because that was how they made decisions, through honest disagreement that always eventually found its way to the right answer. Lily's garden flourished beyond anything she had imagined. The Montana soil, fed by mountain snowmelt and summer rain, produced vegetables in quantities that allowed her to preserve enough for winter and still have surplus to trade in town. Her kitchen became legendary in the territory. Cowboys from ranches 50 miles away found excuses to ride through Silver Ridge at mealtimes. Wes healed. The scar on his shoulder turned from angry red to pale white, and he learned to compensate for the stiffness with a flexibility that made him one of the best ropers on the ranch. He grew 3 inches that first summer and started to fill out from eating Lily's cooking 3 times a day. Lily continued teaching him to read, and by autumn, the boy was working through actual books by firelight, sounding out words with a concentration that made her chest ache, with something that felt very much like a mother's pride. She started ordering books for him from the general store in town, and when they arrived, Wes would carry them to the bunkhouse like they were made of gold. Holt took on the role of foreman with the gruff authority of a man who had been waiting his whole life for a place to call home. And Caleb and Lily built a marriage, not the kind written about in novels where every day is golden and conflict never darkens the door. They argued about money, about the ranch, about whether Wes was old enough to ride night watch alone, about Caleb's stubborn refusal to ask for help, and Lily's equally stubborn insistence on managing every detail herself. They argued about fence lines and planting seasons and horse-breaking methods. But they argued the way people argue when they trust each other completely, with honesty and heat, and the absolute certainty that no disagreement was bigger than what they had built together. And at the end of every argument, one of them would reach for the other's hand. That was the signal. The argument was over. What remained was the love underneath, unchanged and unshakable. Caleb learned to say what he felt slowly and imperfectly because Lily deserved words and not just actions. And Lily learned to let go of the fear that had followed her across 2,000 miles, the fear that everything good could be taken away in an instant, because Caleb showed her every day that he was not going anywhere. 6 months after the cattle drive, Maggie returned with final news. Silas Blackwood had been convicted on every charge. The people he had held captive had testified bravely. "It is really over," Lily said. The running, the fear, the looking over my shoulder. How does it feel?" "Like I can finally breathe. Like I can finally just be Lily Hawk." Winter came to Montana harsh and beautiful. On Christmas morning, Lily told Caleb they were going to have a baby. He stared at her speechless. "Say something," she prompted. "I am terrified and happy and completely unprepared." "Good. That means you will try hard to figure it out." The baby arrived in late summer, healthy and loud and absolutely perfect. A girl they named Grace because that was what they had been given when they deserved it least and needed it most. Grace Hawk came into the world screaming, and she did not stop for the better part of her first year. She had Caleb's stubbornness and Lily's eyes and a set of lungs that could be heard from the far pasture. Wes declared himself her honorary big brother and took the role with a seriousness that made the Cowboys laugh and Lily cremaw. He built her a wooden horse on wheels and spent hours pulling her around the yard while she shrieked with delight. Holt carved a cradle from wood salvaged from the old barn, the barn that Blackwood had burned, turning destruction into something that rocked a baby to sleep. He spent 3 weeks on it, sanding every edge smooth, carving tiny horses and stars into the headboard, because that was how Holt Brennan said what he could not put into words. The crew treated Grace like a tiny queen who had inherited a kingdom made of Montana dirt and mountain pine and cowboy loyalty. Hard men who could rope a steer at full gallop went soft at the sight of her. Cowboys who had not written a letter in years sent word to their own mothers about the baby on the ranch. And on the nights when Grace would not stop crying, and Lily was exhausted, and Caleb was pacing the floor with his daughter against his shoulder, one of the cowboys would always appear at the door, hat in hand, offering to take a turn so the boss and his wife could sleep. That was what Silver Ridge had become. Not just a ranch, a family. The kind of family that is not born, but built one act of loyalty and courage and stubborn love at a time. And Caleb, holding his daughter for the first time with Lily exhausted and radiant beside him, finally understood what his father had gotten wrong all those years. The land mattered. The ranch was important. The mountains were permanent in a way that human lives could never be. But people, the right people, were what made any of it worth fighting for. The land gave you a place to stand, but people gave you a reason to stand there. Years later, when Grace was old enough to ask questions, she would sit on the porch between her parents and listen to stories about the cattle drive that saved Silver Ridge, about the cook who came to hide and stayed to build a family, about the mountain man who learned that trust was not about never getting hurt, but about finding someone worth the risk. And they lived happily ever after. Grace would ask, her small face turned up toward the stars. "No, sweetheart," Lily would say, smoothing her daughter's hair. "We lived fully ever after. Happy and shared and scared and brave and everything in between, because that is what real life is." "But you stayed together." "We stayed together," Caleb would confirm, pulling Lily closer. "Through everything. That is the most important part." And it was true. Through drought and abundance, through hard winters and golden summers, Caleb and Lily Hawk built something that lasted, not because it was easy, not because they were perfect, but because they chose each other every single day and fought for the life they had made together. Silver Ridge Ranch grew into one of the most respected operations in the territory. The crew who had risked everything on that desperate cattle drive became the foundation of something none of them had imagined possible. Wes Callahan grew into a fine young man who could read as well as he could rope, and who told anyone who would listen that his life had been saved by a woman with a cast-iron skillet and a heart bigger than the Montana sky. Holt Brennan retired eventually, but never left the ranch. He spent his last years in a cabin Caleb built for him near the creek, carving toys for Grace and teaching a new generation of cowboys the old ways. And the love story that began with a runaway bride and a lonely mountain man became the kind of legend that people told around fires for generations. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because it proved that the greatest things in life are not built on certainty or safety or perfect circumstances. They are built on courage and commitment and the willingness to fight for what matters most, even when every rational voice tells you to walk away. Lily Ashford had arrived at Silver Ridge Ranch with one suitcase, a false name, and 2 years of running behind her. She became Lily Hawk, a wife, a mother, a woman whose courage had freed people she would never meet, and saved a ranch she had no reason to love. She had come looking for a place to disappear and found instead a place where she finally became fully, completely, unapologetically herself. And Caleb Hawk, the mountain man who trusted land more than people who had built walls so high he could barely see over them, learned the most important lesson a man can learn. That the walls we build to protect ourselves are the same walls that keep out the things that save us. And that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is not pick up a rifle or face down a villain or drive cattle through a flood. Sometimes the bravest thing is simply opening the door when someone knocks.